Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. You know, an essential component of any basic survival kit is some means of starting fires. And so, for years I carried an inexpensive generic brand disposable lighter for that purpose. Now, based on some comments that I'd received both here and from other sources, I got to considering some fancier options to fulfill that function, and I tried out a bunch of different allegedly weatherproof lighters, and today I wanted to share with you a synopsis of the results. One of the first lighters I tried out was this Blazer lighter. I think it's the one they call their Eagle Scout model. After trying it out, I discovered that the significance of that is that an Eagle Scout can start a fire with a flint and steel or by rubbing two sticks together, and so he doesn't need a lighter that works. That said, if I was going to rename this lighter, I would call it the Gambler model, because when you press the button, there's a very small but still finite chance that it will actually light. I don't know if we're actually going to see it tonight, but anyway, obviously for a survival kit you want a lighter that's reliable, and so the Blazer is out. Another lighter I tested was this Windmill all-weather lighter. You know, a very expensive storm-proof lighter. Now, it was definitely an improvement over the Blazer, because when you press the button, there's a pretty good chance it'll actually light. That said, as you can probably see, the flame is almost invisible. And when you take it outside, especially on a bright sunny day, it becomes completely invisible. Well, it turns out that when you're trying to light a campfire and you can't see whether or not your lighter is actually lit, that's a bigger handicap than you might initially think. And so this ended up being more of a novelty than a practical survival tool. Now, I do want to give them some credit, because of the lighters I tested, this was definitely the most wind resistant. Now that said, I saw other reviewers online claiming that this would stay lit in a 75-mile-an-hour wind with driving rain. My experience would lead me to believe that that claim is ridiculously exaggerated. I would guess a 15-mile-an-hour breeze is probably pushing it. And as to being waterproof, well, I took this lighter, I dropped it in a bucket of water, fished it out, and pressed the button, and it wouldn't light. And so, I took my generic brand disposable lighter, dropped it in the same bucket of water, fished it out, it wouldn't light either. So I set these two down next to each other to wait for them to dry out, and periodically tested them to see which one would resume functionality first. The cheap generic brand disposable lighter won the contest. Now that said, obviously this did eventually dry out and return to functionality. But it's definitely not waterproof, and I'd be hesitant to call it windproof. Breeze resistant would be a much more descriptive term. Another lighter I tested was this Vector lighter. And if you're determined to buy some kind of a fancy lighter, the Vector is actually the one that I would recommend. It costs less than a third as much as the Windmill. It's essentially just as reliable. And while it's not quite as wind resistant, it suffers from the same problem of flame invisibility, so you're not going to be using it much outdoors anyway. That said, it is fairly useful for things like lighting candles or singeing threads on your clothing before they start to unravel, so it has its niche of applicability. And of course, no review of fancy lighters would be complete without a discussion of your classic Zippo. Now the Zippo is unique in that while all these other lighters run on pressurized butane, the Zippo has an open reservoir filled with a lighter fluid that is liquid at ambient temperature and pressure. And then there's a wick that comes from the reservoir up into the neck of the lighter and provides it for ignition. Now, that design is kind of a disadvantage in a survival lighter because the fact that you've got an open reservoir, it's not sealed, means that if this thing tips over in your pocket, or even if it doesn't tip over, that fluid can leak out or evaporate, and chances are that when you need to light something, this is going to be empty. And so if you were going to carry one of these around, you'd pretty much have to carry a separate canister of replacement lighter fluid with you at all times, which in my opinion just isn't practical. So once again, while it may be kind of a cool lighter, it's more of a novelty than a practical survival tool. So the bottom line is that after spending a bunch of money and testing out all these different fancy weatherproof lighters, I'm back to carrying my good old-fashioned 25-cent generic brand disposable lighter. And that being the case, I figured by posting this review, I could potentially save you the trouble and the expense of finding this stuff out on your own. Thanks for watching the Idahoan Show.